Welcome to the Westcity podcast. We hope you are encouraged by today's message. If you want to hear more podcasts, you can access them through the Westcity website found in the description link.
We miss out on knowing this beautiful part of what's capable in the hands of people. And you know, he was actually the Northern Territory, and he was a stockman who worked on a, what would you call it? Cattle station, that's it. I was going to say a ranch. I'm like, no, I don't think we have ranches. Cattle station. And, you know, the stockmen, the Aboriginal stockmen were paid about 20% of what the other stockmen were paid. And he was, didn't speak, English wasn't his first language. We would say illiterate, but of course he's just not literate in English. But he was actually an elder. And one day he decided, this is not going to go on. And he organised the walk where all the stockmen walked off. And there was a huge corporation, Westcity, who was, who had controlled that area. They came back and said, we'll increase your wages. He'd had a glimpse. It wasn't about just the money. It was about pride of his people. And he started going up to Canberra and to Sydney and telling people about the needs in their community and the desire for equity and equality. And, you know, he was kind of laughed off as it's never going to happen. And he just kept going and going and going. And it took 10 years. And 10 years later, Gough Whitlam said, yeah, you can have the land. I just think these stories are stories that we need to kind of look back on and remember. And I don't know how many times you've heard that song, but we don't always know the story that goes with it. You know, and that story is from Little Things, Big Things Grow. My name is Kelly. I've been away for quite a while, but I'm going to chat today out of a parable, the parable of the mustard seed, and let's read it together. And he told them another parable, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and he sowed in his field, which indeed is smaller than all seeds. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches." Is that not a beautiful picture? It's a picture that something starts so tiny, just this tiny little mustard seed, but it grows and it grows and it grows into this fully formed tree. And when it's a tree, the birds come and perch in its branches. I love that image. You know, these parables that Jesus would speak, the interesting thing about parables is that I think they're actually often quite easy to understand. Sometimes people say, they're so difficult, such a mystery. I'm thinking, I don't think they're a mystery. I think they're often really quite easy to understand if we take the time to think about them, right? But what they often do is they're often quite in contrast to what we would normally think. That's the challenge. I don't think they're necessarily easy to do, might I say that? I just don't think they're hard to understand. And they're often, the perplexing thing is that they're so in conflict with human thinking. From little things, big things grow, but I don't want them to grow because I want them now. Isn't that the condition of humans? And I love this this word about the thing about parables. It says, and this guy put up this quote when he talks about the parables. He says, Jesus' parables, his parables, told the story of a different world, of the way things ought to be. This is the next slide, guys. Yeah, of the different world, the way things ought to be, of life as ruled by God's generosity and goodness. His parables, Jesus' parables, cut against the social and religious grain of his day and our day. And they went against the expected and the acceptable. They had directly opposed the way we do things here. That's the challenge of the parables. I don't think the challenge is they're hard to understand. I think they just often cut against the grain way we do things here. And yet, here's the call to you and to me. Jesus is the way it should be. That's the call. Jesus' way is the way it should be. That is actually the way it works. So let's think back to that parable. Let's whack that parable back again. Slide 2, guys. And it says, he told them another parable, saying the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and he sowed in his field, which indeed is smaller than all the seeds. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs. It becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches. So, okay, John, you want to help me here? Just get this up. So let's just quickly run through. What is that parable saying? Just one thought out of that. Call it out. Okay, my writing is bad, so try and stay up with me as I actually write each word and you've got more chance. Okay, so the first thing is tiny. Small. Something can start small and become huge. Yeah? So this is the way it's tiny, but also maybe it's saying small is also okay, doesn't it? I think that's in contrast to our thinking. I was actually with an organisation recently in, where was I? Tanzania. And there's this women in a dairy who have built this fabulous dairy that accommodates 400 women, bringing their milk every day, poorest women farmers, and where it gets processed. And they've done a fantastic job since 1988. Not bad, is it? Poorest women built this own manual dairy. So I get there, and there's a man there who is now a business advisor who decides to show me a PowerPoint of this thing growing, and this is the size, and now we're going to have, 2,500 women bringing into this dairy, but it's going to cost this much external investment. The women are then going to have to hand over the dairy and only take these part proceeds. And anyway, he was doing this great pitch to hit me. And at the end of him, I said, so big is better. He was like, yes. I was like, I don't see it. I turned to the women who were there. Do you see that? And they were like, he's the business advisor. I don't care who he is. What's in you? It's that sense always that bigger is better. I think this proverb says maybe not all the time, but at the same time, from little things, big things grow. What else does the parable say? Oh, I'm so glad we're so smart in this church. Like, makes it a lot easier. And he took a seed and he sowed it, and when it was full grown, the birds of the air could perch. Fabulous. It takes time. Time is necessary. What else? You've got to plant it. Is that what someone said? Yeah. You've got to take that seed. You've got to plant. Problem is when we only scatter. You've got to push it down. You've got to plant. What else does it say? So you have the result, which is this idea about time and planting, isn't it? In some respects, the interesting thing is from little things, big things grow. But I love the last picture of that line. What does it say? What does it say, the last phrase? It gives shelter. I love this idea about it's a home. And maybe I should be a bit more true to the metaphor and say, I don't know, I can't do trees. I can't do much in this kind of this realm. But this is a bird, by the way. That's my best effort. Because birds perch in a beautiful mature tree and find a home. Boy, that's just such a fantastic parable, isn't it, when you think about it? And when I think about it, and I know that this parable, I did actually say, just quickly, and this shows how good you guys are, is that my first thought was this idea that small does not mean insignificant. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like the grain of a mustard seed. How can that be? Because the kingdom of heaven should be like the biggest rainbow that the world's ever seen. But Jesus says, you know what it can be like? It can be like the grain of a mustard seed. And then the second thought, just whack that up, you guys, just push it through. The second thing I said was, no, B. Yep. Waiting is necessary. Waiting is necessary. I don't really like to wait. Who here is like fantastic patient person? There will be some, so don't feel embarrassed, because some people are patient. Some people are patient. We got any patient ones here? We need a couple of you. Oh, there we go. I'm actually getting a few nods now. Like, that's good. We need you. Who here is not particularly patient? Oh yeah, that's a little bit of an oval. I'm not. But I keep reminding myself, patience is necessary. If you want to take that seed, you want to plant it and push it down. And then you wait. You might pour on it the water and you want to put it into the best conditions you can. But you have to wait. Waiting is necessary. But the beautiful promise at the end of it is it gets to provide a home. Maybe a home for you and your heart, but it gets to provide this home for others. And I was just thinking about this parable, and I know that we've actually had it already in this series. I've just come back from Africa, where I've been for 6 weeks. And in particular, I've been in Rwanda. We're an organisation that I'm involved in, we work in, that's one of the things that Westcity supports. And I think, when I was pondering this parable, I was like, you know what? This parable, in the way it was put in Matthew 13, was talking about the church. In fact, all of Matthew 13 was 8 parables about the church and about the growth of the church. And you know, the magnificent thing about the church, which started off as this tiny little seed, right? 2,000 years ago is now 2.3 billion, 2.4 billion of the planet, they say now, is now nesting in that tree, which is an overwhelming picture, isn't it? And so that's primarily what this parable is about. But I think it's got this other application, because it's like this way, it's a way of saying, this is how the kingdom works. This is how it can work in your life. Things can start small, but if you plant them and if you wait, you're going to find homes that birds can even nest in. And I was thinking about that in terms of the work that I do and thought, you know what, I just want to kind of think about what God's able to do, what he is able to do. You know, when I go into these countries, the main project that I work in is a project called Grassroots Rwanda. And it's like this, we support it here as a church. It's these self-help groups in Rwanda. And what we do is, initially, step one is just these seeds are just scattered, really. And it's like the poorest women in a village, the absolute poorest women in a village. And they're just, and the first step that we do in that first year is just bring them together into a village meeting. And you'll just have a group of women who are disconnected for each other, and you may see in those individual women little value. You'd know they were the outcasts and rejected in their communities, you know, but they're like these tiny little seeds. And then what happens at this first meeting is all of these women are just standing around, very much on the edge, standing back, looking. And what they start to do is to say, the organisation there starts to try to gather them together by saying, what makes you like each other? You know, not like each other in terms of friends, but be like each other. What are the unifying features here? And they talk about things like, I feed my children once a day. Another feature may be, I hire a hoe to go out and work to get enough money to get that one meal a day. They'll say, you know, I live with the animals, I don't have a home, just live with animals and take care of them. So they tell these, they find all the unifying features so that over this little meeting time, those women form into these groups. 20 women sit together. And for 1 year, all we've got is groups of 20 women. And over that time, they have training, they do savings, but more, they just build friendship. They build friendship. And you'd still be thinking, if you saw that, oh, that's not going to be anything. It's just going to be a group of women who are just going to sit together. At least they've got friends. But you know what happens? Over this year, a tree starts to grow. I really, really struggle with my drawing, as you can see. But anyway, we'll give it a best shot. That's a bit better, actually. It's quite spectacular. Didn't know I had it in me. Take it away. It's the hair. It's the hair, sorry. It's ruffling it. Because over that first, probably about 2 years, 10 of these groups build this tree. And in those tree sits about 200 birds. 200 birds. I don't know, it looks like a cat up there, but it's a bird. And I was thinking, out of these tiny little seeds that gets well planted, they get planted and they get brought together and they get nurtured. And then from that forms this tree. And it's called a village committee. And that village committee brings together 2 women from each of the self-help groups, and they form this committee, which is this tree that can then carry 200 birds in its branches, which is a fantastic picture, isn't it? And anyway, I went to a village called Kurumbi, and it's actually the first village that we planted from Westcity 3 years ago now. And when I arrived at the village of Kurumbi, which I'm going to just write here so that we can remember for the future. The usual happened, where all the women were dancing and, welcoming me, and I was kind of coming towards them, but I didn't recognise any of them. And I was thinking, I don't know these women, and yet I know this village. I've been coming here for 3 years, and I know the women in these self-help groups. And there's about 60 women in front of me, and I'm thinking, I don't know them. What has happened? So I'm looking over at the facilitator, who is the coordinator, a woman called Jeanne d'Arc, and I'm looking at her, and I'm trying to work out what's happening. She's just smiling at me as if to say, and she had that very knowing smile, actually, like, just you wait and see. And I am not sure what's happening. So anyway, I'm waiting. We all sit down, and first thing I say is, it's so great to be here. And then I kind of said to Jeanne d'Arc, can you tell me who's here? I don't know the women I know. All the women aren't here. So Jeanne d'Arc stands to her feet, and she said, we've been having our village committee, and for the last 2 years, we've been dependent on the organisation who has helped us come together and form together. But she said, in the last year, about a year ago, we decided we were going to start our own groups. But we weren't going to look to anyone else to start them. So we started 3 more women's self-help groups, 2 youth self-help groups, and 4 children's groups. And I said, well, who's training them? She looked at me like, who do you think's training them? We are. I was like, you're doing all the training? Yeah, we're doing the training. We've learned. We've practiced it. Now we're the trainers. And I was like, that's unbelievable. She looked so proud of herself. She looked like cat who swallowed the canary. She was very, very excited about it. She said, and my commitment is, by the time you come next year, we'll have 20 women's self-help groups. We've gone from 10 to 13, and she's like, we're going to have 20, and we're going to build them all. And I was like, Jeanne d'Arc, that's just unbelievable that you've done that in... And she said, we planted them just 12 months ago, and the women you see before you, they're the women in the 3 new self-help groups, and they've come to tell you their stories. You just kind of get this sense of where this started and where it moved to. And here's this tree, which is now not only carrying 200 women, but it's actually going to carry 400 women in this tree. And I said to the women, one of the women, they all wanted to tell me their story, which always happens. The first one was Alphonsine, and Alphonsine leaps to her feet. And she says to me, I wasn't going to come to the self-help groups, but the women kept coming. Jeanne d'Arc, who's the coordinator, just kept coming to my house. She just kept coming. You must come, you must come. And she said, I was like living in poverty. My husband did not consider me. My children did not consider me. How could I go out into public and start to meet in this self-help group? But she came so many times that in the end I had to go. And I met the other women who were there who have done so well in the last 2 years. She said, I started to have this little dream inside of me that maybe I could do something. So she said, I did the 6 months of the training and I took out this tiny loan, which was her loan was about $2 she took out. So she said to me 1,500 francs, which is, say, $2. She said, and I had this tiny bit of land out the front of my side of my house, which is 5 metres by about 5 metres, this little space. I planted carrots because they grow quick. And she said, and within 3 months, I realised it was time to harvest the carrots. And when they told me at the local market how much money I could sell them for, she said, I thought to myself, I remember when I used to buy them from the town, and they were a lot more expensive than that. She said, so I went into the town, and I found someone in the town who would come out and buy my carrots for 5 times more than what the local market could give me. I'm like, people are just so incredibly innovative when they have their own opportunity to expand. She said, so I sold them to them. So she said, in one harvest, I could pay back the loan. I had enough money to plant my next harvest, and I leased a piece of land behind me where I could plant wheat. And I was like, this is unbelievable. She said, and then I decided I'd buy a mobile phone. Of course you would. So she said, I just bought the basic model, and she's got it in a little pouch around her. It's like a little pouch with her thing in it. She said, because then I can call the buyers and compare all their prices. And I'm like, anyway, I said to her, can I come to your house and see what you've done? So she says, yes, you come. So anyway, that was the first woman. Then I went to the second woman to tell me her story, and her name was Odette. And Odette jumps to her feet. Oh, by the way, let me tell you that while at the same time as Alfonsina telling me her story, at the next minute she kind of raises her hand, like basically gives a bit of a gesture, and the next minute someone drags over a goat, and she's there, got her goat who is part of the show and tell. And this goat is like, scampering around us, and I'm like, we better keep the goat out. But the goat is trying to keep the goat to the side, because next minute Odette stands up. She starts to tell her story. So Odette says she's this tall woman who has got great carriage, and she stands up. She says to me, I was ashamed, angry, and excluded. I was scared of people, and they were scared of me, because I was a very angry woman, and no one in this community spoke to me. And when Jeanne d'Arc started coming to my house, my husband just closed the door and said, you can't come here because no one comes to our home. And she said, but she wouldn't stop. I'm thinking, that's Jeanne d'Arc, I can tell you. She wouldn't stop. And one day she said to my husband, what are you going to do to get your children out of poverty? And that day he opened the door and said, why don't you go to the self-help group? And she says to me, and today, she says, I run a business at my house and all the people line up to come. I'm the local hairdresser. She shaves their hair with a little, what do you call it, shaver, I guess. She shaves their hair. She says, all the women come and gather in my home. I have animals. And she said, why don't you come to my house? And I'll show you the difference. So the next day I thought, I'm going to go and visit these 2 women, because what I'd also like to see is just see if their families are there. And I go to the first woman's home, Alfonsine, and I saw this, out the back she had animals, and I'm like, how could you have got animals in 1 year? Like, that's a little bit too much. So then she said to me, I said, oh, you've got 2 cows. She says, oh yeah. She said, we learned in the training about the importance of manure if we want to get the best yield. She said, and I couldn't afford a cow, but I knew an old lady in the village who had 2 cows that were very skinny. So I went to her and I said, if you lend me your cows, I will feed them and I will give them all the nourishment they need and find the grasses, and then I have the manure. I own the manure and you own the cows. And for 1 year, I will grow up your cows and then I'll give them back to you. You can sell them at your price and I'll have the money to be able to buy my own cows. So these incredible things, she had these 2 cows there, and then she took me and she showed me those carrots, and she dug a carrot up just to remind me I still do carrots every season. And then she led me on, it's about 20 metres away, where she had a huge wheat farm growing. And it's a plot, probably 20 metres by 30 metres, a farm, maybe exaggeration, plot of wheat. And she said to me, I have built this house, I have remodelled this house. And then, and she's telling me about the huge change. She says, my children all go to school. I feed them 3 balanced meals a day. I heard the usual story. At that point, the phone rang. I'm thinking, oh, here we go. She, basically, sorry, I've got to take a call. She moves to the side. Yes, and she comes back. I said, oh, was that one of the growers? She said, no, it was my husband just asking me, am I well today? am I happy today? I thought, what the changes that happen are so extraordinary, because from little things, big things grow. And I only had to walk about 50 metres up the road to meet Odette. And when I got to Odette was actually there with her husband. And I was really keen to talk to the husbands this time and say what's happened for them. And the two of them came and sat on a chair, 2 chairs in front of me. And they wanted to sit together to tell the story. You know, all of the economic changes come to them as well. But when I said to them, what's the biggest change for you? The two of them held hands and said, we love each other again. And their son was there, Alex, and Alex is 20. He's standing at the door watching, and I can see him keep tearing up the whole time I'm talking to them. He's becoming increasingly teary. And I'm saying to them, what happened, you know? And they said, we were both drunkards. A year ago, we were completely excluded in this village. Every day every night we'd pretty much go out and get drunk, and we'd be so bad we'd fall into the trenches, and our children would come and drag us out in the morning and bring us home. We struggled to feed them that one meal a day, and we lived with a lot of physical violence in our home. And she said, that's what made me. She said, I was just such an angry woman. And she said, today we love each other again. At that point, they have arms around each other. She said, you know what? We go to a church. It's like, you go to a church? Yes. She pointed about, I don't know, right across the other side of the field. It was probably at least a couple of kilometres away. She said, up there on the top of the hill. And she said, the reason we go is we go to say thanks. We go to say thanks for the change that's come into our life. At that point, Alex comes out of the door, and I said to Alex through the interpreter, Alex, have you noticed this change? And he just starts to sob at that point. He just said, I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm not ashamed of my family, and our village is not ashamed of us. I just thought, from little things, huge things grow. And the birds of the air come and they nest in those kind of trees. And the village of Kurumbi has built this beautiful tree for all these birds to come and nest in. The last woman I visited that day was an old friend of mine, Josephine, who I'd known from 3 years ago. And I just wanted to see Josephine because I hadn't seen her at the meeting, and she didn't live far down the road. And she was there, and when I got to her house, she's become the leader of the village of women. So those 200 becoming 400 women, she's now the leader of. And I can tell you, she's a quiet, unassuming woman, right? She's quiet and she's unassuming, just joyful. She's about in her late 40s. And I said to her, how are you going? She says, I'm just loving leading this group. She said, we've decided our big focus is the youth. And we want to find jobs for them and create jobs. She said, one thing we need in this area is sewing. So she said, the thing we thought we should do is that one of us needs to go and learn how to sew so we can teach some of the young people. She said, so I said I would do the sewing course. I'm like, oh, golly, how are you going to do that amongst all your other jobs, you know? She said, it's a priority. She says, I'm doing a 6-month course. And I was thinking, oh, golly, so where you go for that? She says, I walk to the course. And she said, I have to walk 3 hours. I said, every day she walks 3 hours to the course. She does the training. She leaves at 5:30 in the morning. She's there by 8:30. She trains till 1:30 in the afternoon. Then she walks home. She says, I've done it for 3 months, only 3 months to go. And I thought, that's a tree that's wanting to protect other birds, isn't it? Finds a place for them to nest. You know, it was such a wonderful thing. I just thought to myself, that's this picture. But the next thing that's happened in this whole area that we work in is that they formed the first what they call federation. And that's kind of maybe like the little forest. Can I just resist the tree thing and just kind of pretend that's a tree? That brings together 15 to 30 villages. So suddenly you've got, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 women coming together under one leader who was started from here. One of those little seeds has become the leader of 3,000 to 4,000 to 5,000 women. And I met her, and she was a woman who I'd met a few years ago as well, Virginie. She started off having just like nothing. And I looked at her thinking, now she's the leader of all these women. On this trip I had a chance to meet a woman called Redemptor who I had first met 10 years ago. And when I met Redemptor, she was back here, 10 years ago. But now she's actually become the leader of a federation in another area. And I had this chance to meet with her. And I'm just going to show you in a second this little 45-second video, because I had this talk with her over quite a long... No, hold it. Let's not jump the gun. Cool. I met her all these years ago, and I can tell you, she looked 10 years older then than she does now. Her and I laugh that self-help groups are a way of anti-aging, because she actually looks a whole lot younger than when I met her 10 years ago. She now leads 3,500 women. And she was a woman whose husband wouldn't let her go to the group, and she was extremely, it was a very serious domestic violence situation. And I look at her now, and I think, look what's happened. And at some point, she launched into telling me about the importance of vision. I mean, you might go to those leadership talks where people like to do a bit of a vision. We all heard that. And, you know, you kind of know in one way it's true, but you also know you're hearing a bit of spruiking, don't you? But when you hear a woman who has come from abject poverty decide that she's going to give you a little lesson about vision, I think you have to listen. And this is what she said to me.
Numva rero buri muntu uwo ari we wese aho kugira ngo yitinye, usibye no muri Australia n'uwaba ari ahari hamwe isirangirira, ntekereza ko aramutse amenye uburyo ubuzima bwanjye bwabayeho, akamenya aho ubwo uyu munsi buri, wese yakwifuza kujya mu bandi, kandi yakwifuza kutitinya, akumva ko ahagurutse we wese kandi biri ku mutima, atari bya bintu byo kuvuga ngo none aha ndaha ejo ngiye aha. Oya, guhagarara hamwe kandi ukagira icyerekezo niba wiyemeje ngo ngomba gukira kandi urakira.
I just loved it. I loved it. You know, Grassroots Rwanda in 5 years has now planted about 70 trees. So 70 villages. Now there's 14,000 women in these groups, which feels like overwhelming. But you know what? It just starts from this. And if it was just Redemptor, wouldn't it still be magnificent? But the truth is, God does what he wants to do with stuff, doesn't he? And he's got plans for 14,000 women and 20,000 women and 100,000 women. And I kind of think of, I know this sounds nutty, okay? 1 million women in Rwanda is what I believe. 1 million women, which would actually change the face of that country. It's not about numbers. It is not about numbers. It is about the number of trees, a number of villages that we can plant that can provide a perch for those beautiful birds to sit in. Well, that works, doesn't it? Those women, those birds, they would like that. You know, when Jesus spoke, he was opening up the keys of life. And he told stories and parables that were memorable. And they were often simple if we took the time to think them through. God's wisdom is not afar off. It's not difficult to understand. But this doesn't make it easy, and it's certainly not easy to practice. But rest assured, we start small. We can start right where we are, whether it be practicing patience, growing our faith, being bolder, addressing our brokenness, showing mercy. We can start small. For the kingdom of heaven is like the grain of a mustard seed, which a man took and he sowed in his field, which indeed is smaller than all the seeds. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs, and it becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air, they come and they perch in its branches. I want to be part of a tree like that, don't you? Let's just close our eyes. Let's just bow our heads just for a second. God, I just thank you for the wisdom of Scripture. I thank you that even though in one way it conflicts with our human thinking, on the other hand, when we hear it, something kind of rises up inside of us that says, it is true. It is true. And I pray that we never despise small things, that we don't treat them lightly. In fact, we just say to them, God, you just do what you want to do in our lives. That maybe to other people, what we've got doesn't look like much, but I know, God, that whatever you've given to each of us is actually extraordinary. I pray there's rising faith in us, that the call of the future, the call of tomorrow, is not just more of the same, but it's this little seed which is growing and expanding so more birds can come and nest in our branches. May we be that kind of a church. Maybe be that kind of a community. Maybe those kind of families. Maybe we be those kind of individuals. And may we look ever more like you, I pray. In Jesus' wonderful name. Amen. Amen.
Each week at Westcity, we are sent out to be the church in the world. We do this by declaring the following benediction. May you know God's enabling as you join us in living it out. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So go and feed the hungry. Go and clothe the naked. Go and fight for justice. Go and end oppression. Go and proclaim anew the old story. Go and reach those who are running from God and God's church. Go and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, or even like us. And do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.